Welcome to Gem Drafter. Today we are joined by a very smart individual. He's a writer for RotoViz. You can follow him on Twitter at swallace_ff. I hope I got that right.
Yeah, you did. It was
It,
perfect.
it's Samuel Wallace. What's up, Sam?
Hey, not too much. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking some football. This is always great to jump on podcasts with people, and it's a great way to meet people. And it's always fun to chat about players, especially in the off season when it can get a little bit long sometimes.
I totally agree. So the first question I got for you, how long have you played fantasy football?
Ooh, probably. Let's see, what year is it now? Over 10 years, I would say. I started playing back in high school, probably 2009, 2010, right in that range, right before I graduated. It was usually just, redraft leagues with friends, had like a family league that I would do once in a while, but there was never anything super serious really until I got kind of to the second half of college. And the last couple of years is when I really started getting into more of the dynasty and things like that. But otherwise, it was just, teammates and friends doing redraft leagues, and nobody really knew what they were doing. Everybody kind of went out and bought like an ESPN top 300 magazine like right before the draft, and that's just kind of how we did it. But yeah, it's been fun to really kind of see how I used to play to transition to now spending obviously a lot more time in it.
Interesting, very interesting. I think people like to hear that for a little bit of credibility. There's a lot of analysts that just kind of jump in right away into fantasy football,
Mm-hmm.
and it's good to hear that you've played for a decade. And even if it was less competitive leagues, you always learn as you go in any type of thing that you're doing. And I've
Yeah.
played for about that long, maybe a little bit longer. But I took a break in between when I got really into disc golf
There we go. I can
and do the
respect that.
motion.
Yep.
I got really hardcore into disc golf for about 4 or 5 years. So I took a break from fantasy. And
Mm-hmm.
I was saying on a podcast, I think with Josh McGregor, I came back from my hiatus and I made some terrible picks and the learning curve happened all over again.
Did you notice that kind of the community or the industry like got a lot smarter during your time away? Did you notice that people were a lot sharper in the community, or like you said, the learning curve was kind of steep when you came back, or how was that?
Well, I guess I say that with some context behind it is the first couple years that I played, I really knew nothing
Mm-hmm.
and was just going off lists, like you said, from ESPN, and my buddies just owned me. I made bad picks every single year, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much for the first 3-4 years that I played regular redraft fantasy football. And when I came back, I wasn't really a part of like any community. It was still pretty early in like the fantasy football Twitter days.
Yep.
And I honestly, even if it was around, I wasn't on it yet.
Yeah.
So I can't really tell you
Okay. I was just curious,
how it had progressed. Yeah.
just
Not
because
to
it
get too
seems now.
long winded there on that.
Yeah,
But
no, I understand. Just because it seems now like, we have access to so much information, and there's just so many good resources out there for even your average fantasy football player. They don't have to be super competitive or diehard about it, but just the amount of data. And it obviously depends on how well you can understand it and apply that to a draft or something like that. But it just seems that, your average person is better than, like your casual fan used to be.
I will say a lot of credit to the fantasy footballers. They were the first people that I found when I came back to fantasy football,
Yeah,
and
they're
just the
great.
core principles of late QB, late tight end, and the
Hmm.
way they mine for value. A new fantasy owner can't go wrong with starting with their podcast and building that foundation, especially for redraft.
Yep, I agree. Like at the end of the day, you can have all of the metrics that you want, but sometimes going back to the basics, like those core principles, like you said, even if you just do that, your success likelihood is still going to be pretty decent, but it's, how you want to play it.
Yeah, I think Dynasty's a little bit of a different monster though, but with out getting too far off track here, let's keep it tight. Our main event here is some wide receiver teammate breakdowns. That's what I renamed it for like the third or fourth time here.
It works. It works.
We're going to start with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, obviously both very, very fantasy relevant
Hmm.
wide receivers, and we're going to talk about them in aspects of redraft and dynasty fantasy football and just kind of break them down. But we're going to start with Mike Evans. In redraft, he's going at the turn. They're actually both going at the turn. Spoiler alert. Should have said that first.
Yep.
In redraft, and then we'll jump into the dynasty ADP. But what do you think of that value for Mike Evans this year in redraft, I guess, and just overall break down Mike Evans for us, Sam?
Yeah, so he's going at the 1-2 turn is what you have him at right now.
The 2-3 turn.
Oh, 2-3. Okay, 2-3. Okay, because I'm depending on the ADP you're looking at. I'm just looking at an ADP board here.
ADP is so funky, man. Like
it's
different all over the place. This is a general thing. He could be going middle second round to middle of the third round, depending on your league.
For sure. I just wanted to make sure I heard you when you say. I thought you said like for second turn. I kind of missed it for a second. Yeah, 2-3. That's kind of what I'm seeing as well. I think that's more than appropriate. A lot of it. So if you're going at the 2-3 turn there, if you're drafting early in the first round, you're probably going to get a running back. You're probably going to go, Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley. If you end up with either, Mike Evans in the second as your wide receiver 1, or you go somewhere else and you get him as your wide receiver 2 in the top of the third, or depending on how you kind of draft that corner there, I think that's great value. There's some consideration to be had with, the new quarterback coming in and Tom Brady. He's probably not going to air it out quite to the extent that Jameis Winston did, but I think that Evans is more than capable of making up what he'll maybe lose in some air yard volume in efficiency and just having better quarterback play all around. I think that offense is still going to be very good. They may not put up the same amount of, air yards and total offense, but they're going to be a lot more efficient. They probably won't be playing from behind nearly as much as they did last year. So I see some people kind of fading Evans in the sense that, he's only a deep threat guy. I mean, he's a guy who's gone over 1,000 yards every year in his NFL career and really hasn't showed any signs of slowing down. He was a little bit banged up at the end of last year, but still put up phenomenal numbers. So I think that's a more than appropriate value for him. So if I walked away from a redraft league and he was my wide receiver 1, that's fine. I think that offense is still going to be fun. Brady's got a lot to prove that it's not just the Belichick system that made him successful. So yeah, I like it. What about you?
I actually like it too. And I'm digging into this more. I kind of changed some of my initial notes that I had on Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, kind of comparing them. If you look at big picture, long-term statistics, average of their careers for Mike Evans, he actually has better average yards and touchdowns per season than DeAndre Hopkins.
Oh, wow. Okay.
With one less season under his belt. But like you said, 1,000 yards every single year of his career, a 6-year career, only player to do that in NFL history. And for his career, he's averaged 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns, whereas DeAndre Hopkins has averaged, real quick, I'm a little disorganized here, 1,200 yards as well and 7.7 touchdowns. So right around the same range, but just that slight, not even apparent touchdown percentage. But if you're looking for average, if you're looking for a player that's similar to DeAndre Hopkins, it's Mike Evans. Chris Godwin, if we're gonna jump onto him next, his career average over the first 3 years isn't even close to Mike Evans.
Right. Yeah.
And they have had the same QB for that sample size. Less opportunity for Chris Godwin in year 1. I haven't really dug into why exactly. Maybe it was Deshaun Jackson was there that year. But I like Mike Evans at that spot. I like getting, like you said, a Barkley or a McCaffrey if you're in those top 2 picks of your redraft league, and then coming back with Mike Evans and then taking a chance on like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire with your third pick. Maybe but ADPs are rising. Since I talked about the rookie running backs on a previous podcast, they've already rose a bunch. Like Jonathan Taylor's at the top of the 4th round, as opposed to the bottom of the 4th round already. And it's only,
like you said,
the end of June.
ADPs are so fluky. Depending on the type of league that you're in, you might have someone who really shoots their shot on one of these rookies and takes them way earlier than you expect, and that can throw people for a loop. But it's kind of fun to see how people value these guys.
I had initially chalked up the contract situation with Mike Evans to be a positive, but the more I look at it, I think that he's going to ask for money because he's only making on average about $13 million a year, whereas guys that have recently been signed are making in that 16 to 20 million range. And look at those stats I just gave you. You know, his agent's going to be coming to the team with that. So I'm a little bit worried about his situation change maybe. Like it might be a Hopkins type deal this offseason where they maybe Brady falls off this year. I'm just going hypothetical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brady falls off this year. Buccaneers aren't successful. They're not willing to give Mike Evans a pay raise, and they end up paying Chris Godwin and trading Mike Evans.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that type of situation happening.
Yeah, Evans better have a great agent, and I hope he does because you look at a guy like Amari Cooper, who's now the $100 million man with his 5-year deal, and Mike Evans is better. He's put up better numbers. Now you could maybe argue that Cooper's more talented, maybe depending on how you want to quantify that, but that's so hard, especially with these elite wide receivers and how they may play the game so differently from one another. But yeah, it was for a guy like him who's only making $13 million a year. He's probably worth more, and I think he has more than a right to ask for that kind of money. It's going to be interesting to see how well Tampa Bay plays this year. I think that'll play a big part in him either wanting to stick around or in them wanting to pay him as well.
Yeah, yeah. Just I quickly looked it up because I had to get the exact measurements, but his size adjusted speed. People usually view him as just a big body, but at 6'5", 231 pounds to run a 4.53 back in his
quick.
combine day.
Yeah.
He's a true deep threat with that size. So he means a lot to that Tampa Bay offense. And I think Chris Godwin's in a contract year. So it's going to be crazy to see what happens. I could see it going either way, where they sign Godwin and let Evans walk, or they give Evans a pay grade and let Godwin walk.
Man, do you think they'd let Godwin walk? I mean, I can't. It's true. We can kind of sit here and speculate, but he's just kind of like the new hotness right now, both in fantasy and in football, just how he exploded last year. I mean, the hype last offseason for him was unreal, and he pretty much delivered, which was awesome because it doesn't always happen. And he kind of fits, the mold of someone who could be successful in a Tom Brady-led offense. So, but yeah, like you said, I think a lot depends on how well Brady plays this year, how well the team plays this year. If they make a good run, maybe deep into the playoffs, maybe they get to the Super Bowl, who knows? And Brady's still feeling good, they may say, hey, we want to try to run it back. We have all the pieces in place. Let's do it. But yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun, I think, for sure.
If Brady stays good, I'm loading up the contract situation just to get the exact numbers. But I think they can get out from under Mike Evans in 2 years for pretty cheap, like $3 million only.
Yeah, that might not be a bad football move for an organization and let him go elsewhere because he's going to demand a ton of money.
Because I think Godwin can play any position on the field and be really good.
I agree.
So that might be a better long-term investment for them, depending on what kind of guaranteed money they give him. And it looks like in 2021 they can cut Mike Evans for a $3.6 million dead cap.
Okay.
And he's only making $12 million that year, so maybe they hold on to him for 2021, and then in 2022 it's $2.4 million dead cap. So the team really is holding all the cards for Mike Evans' future right now. I don't think that really affects to jump into some dynasty value. I don't think that affects his dynasty value that much. He's a great player. Like we said, 1,000 yards every season for 6 straight seasons, multiple seasons with double-digit touchdowns. He had one off season with 3 touchdowns. Otherwise, it was 12-8, 12-8.
Yep. And he's still young. I mean, he's only 26 years old right now anyways. He's only like 2 years older than Chris Godwin. So, Evans came in super young, and he's just getting into that wide receiver, that prime age for wide receiver production. So like you said, whether he changes teams or not, he's still an elite dynasty asset.
And that's what people are loving about DJ Moore and AJ Brown right now, is that young production. And Mike Evans has already done it, and he's still young. And we've just spent like 10-15 minutes on Mike Evans alone here. So let's talk about some Chris Godwin. Let's not let's take a little bit of time on Chris Godwin.
Sure. Yeah, and I kind of hit on a few things that, we kind of touched on a few things with him already, kind of in our back and forth about Mike Evans. I think you hit on a really good point that I hadn't thought of, but I think he's probably a little bit more versatile from a positional standpoint on the field. He probably has an ability to line up in a few more locations than Evans does and be successful. He can play inside. He's shown an ability to play outside. He's very tough over the middle. He fits kind of that prototypical Tom Brady slot wide receiver that a lot of people have been kind of comping him to during this offseason after Brady made the move down to Tampa Bay. I think, the hype was real for him last year, I think you could have a chance to be even more excited. The team may not be playing from behind as much as they were last year. So, Winston was a great fantasy quarterback, even if he was bad for real football. But I think the entire offense will make up for maybe in a lack of volume, just being more efficient. That offense will probably, sustain longer drives early on. They won't be turning the ball over as often. I think Brady will just make smarter decisions with the ball compared to Winston. Yeah, so there's no reason that I don't think, Godwin isn't a top 5 wide receiver, both in redraft and in dynasty.
I could totally see the efficiency going up. And talking about Godwin, 4.42 speed, he's got requisite size to do whatever on the field. Like I said, 6'1", 209 pounds. Already commanded a 20% target share last year. With Brady, that could go up slightly, 22%. So we could see him outproduce this last year that he had with Jameis Winston, even though he had 121 targets. I mean, what did Edelman have last year? I don't have that right off the top of my head, but we could see Godwin hit, 130, 140 targets this year, maybe 100 receptions, yardage maybe stays the same, touchdowns were
Edelman had
high last year.
153 targets last year.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to see Godwin have a 1,410 season with Tom Brady.
Right.
The way that Godwin's going to work the field for him.
Mm-hmm.
I like Chris Godwin a lot.
Yep.
No, go for it, man.
I was going to say, he looks so small on the field when he's standing next to Mike Evans. So, when you listed off his height and weight, I was like, yeah, he is. He's 6'1", he's plus 200 pounds. But, when he's standing next to a 6'5" teammate, he looks a little bit shorter. But he's not he's not like a Marquise Brown build. He's a lot more put together and can handle maybe taking more of a beating over the middle of the field. Like I said, he's got great size. So to kind of reiterate and hear that again, I'm like, yeah, the dude can play anywhere. He's your classic build for a wide receiver.
I don't mind his dynasty ADP either, with all that baked into it. In one QB going mid or high second round, kind of, and a super flex going later to mid second round. That's not bad for a guy that's 24 years old that has put up a 1,309 season.
Yep, I'm with you. He's fun. The hype paid off, and it's great.
Just to touch on some QBs that might be possibilities for him if Tom Brady falls off this year. Doesn't look like Dak Prescott, but slim chance. Maybe Phillip Rivers isn't long for Indianapolis. Jacoby Brissett definitely isn't long for Indianapolis. Trubisky is a free agent after next year. Tyrod Taylor, maybe Herbert takes that job and Tyrod Taylor is looking for a new home. Andy Dalton is a free agent in 2021. And I threw in Nick Mullins because a lot of people like his talent, and he's an interesting guy that had some production and success in the NFL when Jimmy Garoppolo was hurt. And very, very long shot, definitely a long shot, Jameis Winston to come back to Tampa Bay.
Man, I don't know. He could, that would be quite the the storyline. How if he sits behind Breeze for a year or two or whatever, and I don't know, that would be fun.
That's what Teddy just did,
Yep.
But he didn't go back to the same organization, obviously, because they re-signed Kirk Cousins. And then just quick hitters in 2022, Ben Roethlisberger's a free agent, Mariota, Baker Mayfield. The 2018 QBs are free agents because they all went first round. Beside Lamar Jackson went first round. I didn't include him. Lamar Jackson's he's not going anywhere. But all the other QBs from that class have some question marks that might result in their teams going a different route. So Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, definitely. Probably not. yeah, for sure. I think it might have a little bit to do with the attitude there.
Yep.
Probably not Deshaun Watson, but I just put his name on here just because if he's sick of Bill O'Brien, maybe he's looking for a new home. An interesting guy, Philip Walker, the second, came from the XFL to be Teddy Bridgewater's backup, and Nick Foles. Sounded like you had something to say about Deshaun Watson there.
No, I'm just like, man, like you said, if he's getting sick of Bill O'Brien, I don't know. I mean, they shipped off his number one wide receiver for essentially nothing. So, I mean, I feel for him.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Just quickly gonna see if I have any other notes on Evans and Godwin this year. Yeah, I just think Godwin is going to be expensive, but he's
Mm-hmm.
probably worth it. So we will see what happens with that situation.
Yep.
Next up, I want to talk about these two primary wide receivers for the Houston Texans, both pretty
Speaking of Deshaun
injured
Watson.
guys. What's that?
Speaking of Deshaun Watson.
Yeah. Yeah, nice segue there,
Was
Sam.
good. Was good.
Better than me. uh, these two wide receivers for the Texans have been oft injured so far in their career. Actually, Brandin Cooks lesser so than Will Fuller by a lot, but people are
Right.
worried about the concussions. So Brandin Cooks is actually going behind Will Fuller. Nope, I'm wrong about that. Will Fuller is going behind Brandin Cooks,
Okay.
but they're very, very close. So we're talking. If I didn't say it 17 times already, we're talking about Will Fuller to start this.
Yep. Yeah, he's so tough to project because we've all seen the talent, we've seen the speed, we know how much better Deshaun Watson is. It's like on a pure game split perspective when Fuller is there and when he isn't. It just seems like he's a long touchdown waiting to happen almost every game. But can you trust the health? It's hard to. It's really hard. I mean, he has yet to play a full season in his career. He's 4 years into his career. He's played 14 games, 10 games, 7 games, 11 games. You just can't put it together. Now, you can project and say, okay, you look at his last 16 healthy games and you stat those all out. It's an awesome season. I mean, it's right up there with like some vintage Deshaun Jackson healthy years as like, just this big yards per catch guy, long touchdowns, just high fantasy points, maybe not on a ton of volume, but do you want to invest in that? Are you going to say, look, year 5, this is the year he puts it together? He can take the Devontae Parker 5th-year breakout. That's fine. But in redraft, it's hard. If you're a guy who's like, I'm in, like I'm going to, ride and die with Will Fuller, go for it. I mean, he's a league winner at his price. If he stays healthy for 16 games, he has wide receiver 1 upside, top 12 wide receiver upside overall. But I don't know if that's a risk I'm willing to take. At some point, obviously, everyone becomes a value. If he continues to fall, then I'll for sure take a shot at him. In best ball leagues, absolutely, because then you don't have to worry about picking the week that he either goes off or stays healthy. But it's tough. So where are you on Will Fuller?
I think at his redraft ADP, I'd rather take a chance on a running back there or somebody else just because I know the upside's there, but just looking at his career averages, that's what I kind of did for this podcast. It's 550 yards and 4 touchdowns. His touchdowns have come in spurts in games against probably bad defenses, and Watson just being on. I just can't trust the health with looking at his extensive injury history. I mean, all since entering the NFL in 2016, 5 hamstring strains, 2 knee strains, an ACL tear, a rib fracture, broken clavicle, and a sports hernia this last year.
That's just tough. And those hammy strains, especially those guys that are built for speed, that just ruins you. And those soft tissue injuries, we just never know when they're going to come back.
Yeah. I really hope that not to get too off subject here, but I really hope that this doesn't end up the route that Deebo Samuel goes with his career. Because in college, he did have kind of a almost Rodney Anderson type resume with injuries, not nearly as bad, but to shift back towards these Texans wide receivers, I'm off Will Fuller in redraft and dynasty at the ADP. I'm just there's so many wide receivers. I'd rather invest in somebody else.
Yep.
And Brandin Cooks, to me, really isn't that much better of an option to jump over to him. And to spoil it a little bit for Deshaun Watson, I love the talent of Deshaun Watson, but I think we might be in for a couple of rough years with him. But let's jump back to Brandin Cooks.
Yeah. I'm actually pretty interested in Brandin Cooks right now. I mean, because he's still young. He's 6 years into the league and is only 26 years old. So he's kind of taken that Mike Evans path. And he's like the super rare case where all he does is put up 1,000-yard seasons and it doesn't matter who his quarterback is. Like normally switching teams is bad, or at least it's not great. And it takes guys a little while to kind of get maybe acclimated. But he's jumped from New Orleans to the Patriots to the Rams, now to Houston. And he's put up 1,000-yard seasons pretty much everywhere he's gone. And the tricky thing with him is obviously the concussions. That's a huge concern for sure. We only know about the ones that are documented, as he's had like what 5 or 6 already in his career that we know of. Have there been more than that? I'm not really sure. That maybe just have gone undocumented. He didn't really know, wasn't really tested for one, something like that. But I guess I'm less concerned about his injury history than I am about Will Fuller's. Obviously, concussions are very dangerous, but we just don't know. I mean, they can happen to anybody at any time. I mean, obviously, just like any other injury can, you can tear an ACL at practice. We see those non-contact injuries when guys just, pull up running a route at practice and they're done for the year. But because of how prolific Cooks has been in his career, I don't mind him. I'm definitely more in on him, probably both in redraft and ADP compared to Will Fuller. Again, the concussions give me pause, but I think I'm more willing to assume that level of risk on my roster compared to someone like Will Fuller. Because we've already seen Brandin Cooks produce in his career and stay healthy for, I think, the last 4 seasons up until just this last year.
Yeah. The concussions have just been the main concern, 2 major ones this last year, but we've seen players come back from that. Devontae Adams is a prime example of a guy who had 2 bad concussions in a single year and has come back to be a stud fantasy wide receiver. Cooks, really doesn't have that much of an injury history when I really look at it. So you make some really good points there. He's got the burner speed, just like Will Fuller. Only ran 1/100th of a second slower than Will Fuller at the combine. In redraft, you're maybe looking at him being your 3rd wide receiver, which isn't a bad option when he projects to be the primary wide receiver in this offense. So for redraft, I'm on board. But for dynasty, I'm just leery of guys retiring early as of late. And so, like I said, when we were talking about Will Fuller, there's so many wide receivers out there. I'd rather have a 2021 second and count on my scouting skills than have Brandin Cooks on my team in Dynasty.
And I think both of these guys too, you bring up a really good point about the distinction between how you want to value your redraft rosters versus Dynasty. If someone is just like I'm out on Brandin Cooks, I'm out on Will Fuller, and they'll sell them to you for, pennies, relatively speaking, there's upside for sure. And even if it means you trade for him cheap, he plays a couple games and then you flip him for something else, he doesn't even have to stay in your roster for very long. Now, if you kind of want to, take an active role in trading that way, it can work. You're assuming the risk because then maybe the 3 or 4 weeks you have him on your roster, that's when he gets hurt. So be it. I mean, but that's kind of the game we play. But you bring up a good point about guys leaving early, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I always encourage people to, look out for themselves, look out for their bodies, their mental health, their families, all of those things. That's a very important thing. And football is such a small part of their life, longevity wise. And you hope they have long, healthy, and successful lives after they're done with the game. But yeah, the more we know about concussions and what it can do long term, the more information that players have, the more you'll probably start to see more of them making Andrew Luck type decisions, Luke Kuechly type decisions and saying, look, I have years left, but I want to walk away while I'm still ahead.
Yeah, that's always a thought in the back of my mind when I have it written down here, 4 to 5 concussions. When I Google it, they say 5 documented concussions for Brandin Cooks. But when I actually try to find them, there was 2015, so a long time ago, late in the season, the 2018 Super Bowl, and then 2 concussions last year. So I only can find 4, but they say 5 confirmed in the NFL.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, man. When those start adding up, it gets scary real quick.
I think both of these guys are much better best ball options, obviously, than regular options.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll throw in about Cooks or really anybody, I mean, if either one of those guys stays healthy and plays a full 16 games, they're probably going to just crush whatever their ADP is because, Watson's got to throw to somebody, and it's Kenny Stills right now and, a couple of decent running backs that are pass catchers out of the backfield, a couple of tight ends. I mean, that's really it. So one of these guys is going to have to be the one. And if, they're a 1A and a 1B, you're kind of looking at 2 guys that are both wide receiver 2s in essence on the same team. Neither one of them really projects to be like the alpha wide receiver. But, if you want to shoot your shot on one or both and one of them hits, you're probably going to cash out pretty well.
I just forecast a rough year for Watson because of all the weapons around him being injury labeled, like
Yep.
Cooks, Fuller, David Johnson hasn't been
Free Duke
healthy.
Johnson, man. Let him play.
Yeah, that's what people have been saying for 4 years.
The all-time leading
um,
rusher at University of Miami should not be a third down back only. But
they have
anyways,
they have no tight ends of
right,
consequence, so
right.
but it is still, in my opinion, Russian roulette of
Yep,
who is going to be the guy for
yep,
you off the Houston Texans. It's pretty much Deshaun Watson or bust
yep, yep.
this year. Speaking of productive QBs, Russell Wilson, he's a productive QB. He's got two
Very.
pretty good wide receivers. He's
Mm-hmm.
very efficient. Last year, Tyler Lockett had career high in targets from Russell Wilson. Maybe it's finally him getting out from behind the shadow of Doug Baldwin.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler Lockett's going in the middle 5th round, it looks like, in redraft this year. And the more I dug into Tyler Lockett, the more I liked, because
Good. I'm glad to hear
he
that.
he's only 27, man. Like, just to kind of skip ahead and like talk dynasty, he's only 27.
Mm-hmm.
He's had an extreme injury where he broke 2 bones in his leg. And in that same season, he played with a torn PCL
Mm-hmm.
that he didn't get repaired until he broke 2 bones in his legs. So he has had an extreme injury, but has a very limited injury history. And he's been nothing but efficient with a very efficient quarterback that's also only 32 years old and very skilled, playoff
Yeah.
bound. What else can
Mm-hmm.
I say? Tyler Lockett.
Man, he's so good. And just kind of, thinking about, DK's obviously the big new guy. Everyone always is going to remember, his pre-combine shirtless pic working out, just this behemoth of a man. And, he's great, as long as you don't throw a cone out there and have him try to run around. That was like DK's knock heading into the NFL season. But, kind of all kidding aside, looking at how their ADP is, and I think DK's priced ahead of Lockett. And DK's ADP right now, kind of just comparing him to Lockett, already has like his ceiling baked into it. Like you're like when you're drafting DK Metcalf where he is right now, like you're hoping on a jump. You're hoping on him kind of continuing on from an already impressive rookie season. And Lockett is, he's still, I think, going to be Russell Wilson's favorite target. He's going to be. DK showed a good chemistry with him last year, but again, he's a rookie. Lockett has been there for a while. He's still relatively young. And you look at, the season totals from Lockett last year, they weren't great, but he got hurt pretty bad middle of last year. I think it was like week 10, had a pretty bruised up leg that looked, I think, more serious than it ended up being. He really didn't miss any time, but you look at his kind of his splits before that injury and after, and I just kind of have his first 9 weeks pulled up here. So he got hurt in week 10. Through the first 9 weeks of the year, he was averaging 19 points a game in PPR. Tyler Lockett was. So over half of your season and 9 out of your 13 weeks for fantasy for your regular season, he was averaging almost 20 points a game. Some of that was buoyed by a 40-point game in week 9 against Tampa Bay, but otherwise it was, 32, 14, 12, 16, 16. He was very consistent. It's a low passing volume team. They still want to run the ball. And I've talked to a couple of different Seahawks fans, and they always say, I wish they would just let Wilson throw. Like if we could really just unleash what is probably one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league right now. And you
Yeah.
talked about efficiency, early on. That's what Wilson does. I mean, he's very efficient. He kind of breaks efficient matrix that we have. Well, he shouldn't be, what he is, and he kind of has to have these late game theatrics to save the team. But man, I would love to see them just come out and throw a bunch, just to see him put up, he could probably put up like a Patrick Mahomes type season because he's that talented, and I think his pass catchers are that talented as well. So give me Lockett at his ADP for sure.
I agree. I definitely agree. And I think we could see a little bit more volume from Wilson this year because he has 2 very talented wide receivers now, and those running backs are banged up. I don't expect Carlos Hyde to just jump in there and do what Chris Carson did last year. I'm optimistic about DJ Dallas, but it's just ugly in that backfield. So I expect the wide receivers, and maybe if Greg Olsen can stay healthy,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of make up for what has been a heavy running game over the last couple of years. Like I said, Tyler Lockett had his most targets ever last year, and like you said, he was banged up, but still finished with 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. it seems like the touchdowns come in efficient offenses.
Yep.
So I love Tyler Lockett as my second wide receiver in my redraft league. And if we're talking dynasty for Tyler Lockett in a super flex, his ADP drops significantly from 1 QB to super flex by almost 30 spots. And
Wow.
I believe
Okay.
that's because of QB runs
Yep.
going on in those middle rounds, 5, 6, Darnold, Cousins, Locke, Breeze, Brady, Jimmy G, Ryan Tannehill, Gardner Minshew. Sometimes those guys are all going ahead of Tyler Lockett. And I think that in a Superflex league, my strategy this year has been to take a guy at value like Deshaun Watson in the early second round to lock up that first QB spot. So I'm not so desperate for QB in that 5th, 6th round, and then I can score on Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, he was wide receiver 13 last year on the year. And that was after essentially being like a decoy on the field because he was still a little bit banged up down the stretch. So, yeah, I mean, the fact that he was basically a wide receiver 1 anyways, despite not playing at 100% for the last like 6, 7 weeks, that says a lot to me, especially as the number 1 pass catcher with an efficient offense and an efficient quarterback.
Well, I'm glad we can agree on Tyler Lockett. I think his teammate DK Metcalf is a similar player, although much less agile than Lockett, but I think he still wins where he needs to and is a very good player for your fantasy team. Like you said, he's going ahead of Lockett in all formats, redraft and dynasty, 1 QB and superflex.
Yep.
Which he gets that youth bump, but he has had a little bit more of an injury history than Tyler Lockett. Had a foot, had a neck injury. That's I consider a neck injury a lot more serious than a broken leg.
Yeah. Whenever you start messing around with the neck and the spine, that's not good. I mean, he had I think like a knee scope or something right before the season started this last year. But
I didn't have that down, but I think I remember that.
Yeah, because I remember it was he had to have just some minor cleanup procedure. I don't remember exactly what it was. I don't have it in front of me, and he was kind of joking and everyone was like, okay, well, this highly touted rookie is having a surgery right before the season. And I think he made some comment of I'm Wolverine. I heal overnight and it's fine. And he kind of did. I mean, like you said, he gets the youth bump in Dynasty for sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think if you want to zig while everybody else zags in Dynasty, and I think you brought up a great point of how you want to construct your roster. If you want to, maybe attack a solid quarterback early on and then let that whole kind of mid-round quarterback run go, if Lockett's your wide receiver 2, he's probably wide receiver 2 value for the next couple of years. He's still young. There's really no reason to lower him in your projections or at all. That recency bias can have an effect on people, and they look at his second half of last year and say, well, he kind of, exploded early and kind of faded down the stretch. But, as well as I do, when you start really breaking down the games and the details and the context, that's when you have a much clearer picture of a player's actual value.
Yeah. And, we always value these youth guys because we see years to come, but there's so many times when they have a big season and then it doesn't happen again for them after that. Not saying that's going to happen with DK Metcalf, but he had a similar target share to Tyler Lockett last year, but didn't put up, I guess he did put up pretty much the same amount of stats, just slightly less. But if you project DK Metcalf to improve this year by just 20%, he would be putting up what Tyler Lockett did last year. So
right.
If we see a healthy Tyler Lockett this year, he's going to be much more of a value for your team if you're a winning team. But DK Metcalf is probably the asset to keep, at least, maybe not pay for, but keep on your team in Dynasty if you're building for the future.
Right. And I think your last point is super important. A lot of it's how are you constructing your team? If you're kind of building, if you're doing a Dynasty startup right now and you say, hey, I want to be more competitive early on. It's not that if you draft DK, you're not going to be competitive, but you brought up a good point where you said, we're always chasing the youth and the upside and the potential. And who knows, maybe his rookie season was DK's best year and that's just going to be his ceiling right now. Well, he's being drafted kind of anticipating a sophomore second year bump. And Lockett's kind of being drafted as a discount because of his age relative to his teammate and the fact that he was hurt at the end of last year. But, Lockett's a great guy that you can draft to win now and probably for a couple of years yet. And you're buying DK in the hopes that he becomes the type of producer that Lockett is right now. So we're always kind of chasing the new shiny toy in Dynasty, it seems like. And I think that provides maybe some opportunities for fantasy owners to maybe bolster their lineup for lower than what cost should be to acquire a player.
I don't want to. I want to just clear. I just want to clarify real quickly that
Sure.
I do prefer DK Metcalf over Tyler Lockett in
Yeah.
Dynasty.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Because 900 yards and 7 touchdowns is nothing to scoff at for DK Metcalf's rookie season.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're comparing him to another young wide receiver in Courtland Sutton, he had a much better rookie season, especially in the touchdown department,
Right.
and the target department at a younger age.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been finding myself last year before the Broncos drafted Jeudy putting Courtland Sutton ahead of DK Metcalf in Dynasty, but I think it's more of a debate now. DK Metcalf versus Courtland Sutton in Dynasty. I've personally, up until recently, had Courtland Sutton ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's definitely a conversation to have, or just maybe you say they're very close, they're back to back. But
Right.
I'm trying to jump into talking about Courtland Sutton here in the Denver Broncos.
That was perfect. I love it.
He is going very, very high in redraft. Courtland Sutton, that is.
Mm-hmm.
Too high for my liking. Honestly, I see the upside, but I think he's going in the second round, maybe late second round, like right around where Mike Evans is going. If I could look it up real quick.
The ADP that I have up in front of me from FFPC over at Rotoviz, I have Sutton right now going.
I think that was a mistake. Yeah, he's going in the 5th round.
Okay, because I have him in the 5th round at wide receiver 20 in redraft.
Well, apologies to everybody. I think I wrote 22 instead of 52.
Oh, I was going to say, hey, maybe you just, bumped the ADP a little bit or created more of a buying opportunity. There's nothing wrong with that.
I love the talent of Courtland Sutton, but I mean, in redraft, there's, like I said, Mike Evans, much prefer him, oh gosh. 5th round is not a bad ADP for Courtland Sutton in redraft.
Right. Well, here we go. Let me ask you these couple of questions. So I'm just kind of looking at some wide receivers right now in front of me on the board who are going in the 5th round in redraft. So there's 6 of them. Let me know which ones you would take over. Would you prefer Courtland Sutton to any of these guys? So would you prefer DK Metcalf or Courtland Sutton in redraft?
I'm probably taking the chance on DK Metcalf there.
Okay, so Courtland Sutton or Tyler Lockett, who's also going in the 5th round.
Tyler Lockett, just because of the quarterback.
Yep, and I would agree. I would agree on both with the quarterback. It's Courtland Sutton or DJ Chark?
I think DJ Chark, based on him being the alpha dog there.
Yep.
Because I believe in Jeudy's talent.
Yep. Okay, so Courtland Sutton or Keenan Allen in redraft, not in Dynasty.
I'm going to take Courtland Sutton there just because of the continuity. Played with Block last year. Keenan Allen in a brand new situation as far as quarterback goes.
Yeah, so then the last one, Sutton or Terry McLaurin in redraft. Also going in the 5th round.
Sutton, because I don't think Washington is going to be very good. And even if Courtland Sutton has shown that he's good, and all they did was add weapons. So I believe that he's going to be getting more open than Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, so you and I were step for step. I agree with all the ones that you said. I like the continuity of the quarterback situation for Chark. I like his alpha status. And yeah, I just think, Russell Wilson's a better quarterback than Drew Lock. So, but yeah, I agree there. That was good.
So now that I have the ADP correct for Sutton, and I'm not comparing him to Mike Evans, who's going way ahead of him.
It's all right.
I don't mind Sutton at that ADP because you're maybe grabbing 2 running backs early, grabbing a guy like a Mike Evans or a whoever else is going in the 3rd round there, maybe a DJ Moore. Yep. And then you're grabbing another running back in the 4th, hitting your wide receiver 2 as Sutton in the 5th round. That's decent. If I could just look real quick at what running backs are going right around Sutton's redraft ADP in the 5th round. Sutton or nobody, man. It's Kareem Hunt, Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift. Are you taking a chance on any of those guys over Courtland Sutton?
It depends on how I build my roster early on. If I'm going wide receiver heavy early or going, kind of maybe modified running back or zero running back where I don't take one until the 4th or 5th round, it's possible. But yeah, like you said, it's kind of looking. So if you can grab, Saquon Barkley, Mike Evans, you grab Kenny Galladay then in the 3rd, Robert Woods in the 4th, or even, a David Johnson in the 4th if he falls that far, which he won't. But yeah, like you said, I think Sutton's ADP is fair value there, and his numbers last year were actually better playing with Emmanuel Sanders. So I think adding another talent like Jeudy is going to help him, kind of grow and develop as a player. So I love what that team did to surround Drew Lock with weapons just across the board offensively.
I like Sutton, but I like Jerry Jeudy's value a lot more.
Okay.
I think, going in the late 8th, early 9th round in redraft, I wouldn't mind grabbing him there as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 for a redraft. I'm more youth chaser than most probably. So people might think that's crazy.
Like a lack of off-season programs this year or shortened off-season programs for the rookie class? Because I've kind of seen, and I can see some maybe truth to it, of rookies won't have as much time to get up to speed on the playbook, spend time with the quarterback, build that chemistry. Do you have any thoughts about that when it comes to maybe redraft leagues this year with wide receivers?
I can see that greatly affecting some guys that are more average, but I think Jeudy is all in on football. He's a great talent. I think he's that type of guy that called him as soon as he got drafted and said, "Give me the playbook."
Right.
So yeah, I'm really not worried about Jeudy. I think talent shines, and him and Lamb were pretty much step for step as my top wide receivers in this class. And I think, like I've said before on the podcast, 3 years from now, I see them being in that late 1st, early 2nd of dynasty ADP value.
Yeah. The talent is there. I hope they can put it together. That's great.
I think he is a little bit of a risk as far as dynasty ADP. If that doesn't work out, it's a risk I'm willing to take because he's going late 4th for 1 QBs, and then 5th, 6th round for super flex. But and especially in a keeper, if I can take Jerry Jeudy in the 9th round of a keeper, that's what I did last year with Courtland Sutton, and I'm keeping him in the 9th round this year.
That's so cheap for a keeper league as a 9th round value. Yeah. It's, if nothing else, you can just say, I'm just going to draft, any Alabama wide receiver because they seem to be phenomenal route runners and they're just good football players. So if that's your only valuation there of Jerry Jeudy, I think you're going to come out okay.
Yeah, Calvin Ridley, is everybody's dynasty breakout this year. I guess redraft value as well. And Alabama wide receiver, much less of an athlete than Jerry Jeudy.
Right. But yeah, good route runner. And like you said, the breakout hype is real right now. So I hope he follows through on it.
Well, that's all we got here on the show sheet, Sam. We kept it pretty tight, 48 minutes. I said 45. Is there anything else you want to share with your fans? Because that's who's tuning in tonight.
That's fair. No, like I said, I appreciate you having me on. This is always fun. It's when you said we were breaking down wide receiver teammates, I was really looking forward to this because sometimes I think we kind of get caught up in our own rankings and tiers and values and things like that. But to find value within a certain team, I think is really, really cool. And it was nice that we could kind of break it down both from a redraft and a dynasty perspective, and that, there's different ways of looking at it and kind of looking at the whole context of situations of players and contracts. I like how you really got into that early on with Tampa Bay. They're going to have to make some decisions as an organization, and as a dynasty owner, that's another variable that you have to keep in mind. Now, you don't necessarily have to be a big fan of following player contracts and things like that, but adding another nuance to your level of understanding really makes you just a more well-rounded fantasy football player anyways, and probably gives you an edge over your league mates. So that was great. Appreciate the conversation. This was fun.
Always, always. All great points by you. And I just wanted to quickly also mention that sometimes taking a deep dive into each aspect of these players might change your opinion because a lot of times our opinion gets swayed by the groupthink of Twitter and all that. So it's really a good exercise to take a look at all the things for these players that we looked at tonight.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to look at a different perspective.
Thanks so much for coming on, Sam. I really appreciate it. Did you want to shout out any articles or anything? I know you just had some backfields that you were decoding recently
Yeah.
for
So
RotoViz.
yeah, absolutely. So you can find my work over at RotoViz, a series I'm working on right now. I'm not really sure how long it's going to be. I'm working on, I think this is piece number 5 I kind of have in the works of decoding different backfields heading into 2020. So looking at different running backfields in the league that have some value that may be harder to decipher because there's not a clear-cut running back one. Or maybe there's not a lot of value there, but the touch has got to go to somebody. So I did the 49ers and the Ravens. I did the Dolphins, I did the Texans, and I'm working on the Green Bay Packers, which is a hometown team for me, being from Wisconsin. So, kind of looking at how their second round pick, AJ Dillon, is going to fit into that backfield, both for redraft and then for dynasty as well.
All right, looking forward to that. Follow him at @SWallace_FF. Thanks, Sam.
Yep, appreciate it.